I married Noah because I owed his mother a debt. Nothing more. The words slipped through the half-open door of Ethan Caldwell's study and landed in my hands heavier than the silver tray I was carrying. For one quiet second, the whole house seemed to hold its breath. The old grandfather clock at the end of the hall kept ticking, slow and polished, like nothing had changed. The tea in the porcelain cup trembled just enough to make a thin amber ring against the saucer. I looked down at it instead of looking at the door, because if I looked at the door, I might have remembered I was standing outside my husband's office on the night of our first wedding anniversary, wearing the soft cream sweater I had chosen because he once said the color made the house feel warmer. Inside, Ethan's voice continued calm as winter glass. The agreement protected him. His relatives had already started circling the estate. Clara trusted me to make sure her son would never be left alone. A man answered him, probably Mr. Harris, the family attorney, but I barely heard the reply. I only heard that one word. Debt. Not love. Not even fondness. A debt. I had spent the entire afternoon cooking because Ethan hated restaurant food when he was tired. Rosemary chicken, roasted carrots, mashed potatoes whipped with too much butter the way he secretly liked, and a small vanilla cake cooling under a glass dome in the kitchen. I had set 2 candles on the dining table, then removed one because it looked too hopeful. I had told myself not to expect anything. Ethan was busy. Ethan was reserved. Ethan showed care in ways other people might miss. That was what I had told myself for 12 months, every time he came home late and thanked me with the same distant politeness he used for the driver, the housekeeper, the clerk at the bank. I had told myself a gentle heart could survive in a cold house if it stayed patient enough. The tray shifted in my hands. The spoon tapped once against the cup. It was such a small sound, but the door opened immediately. Ethan stood there in his dark suit, his tie loosened by half an inch, his pale blonde hair still perfect except for one strand near his temple. His gray eyes moved from the tray to my face. For the first time that night, his calm cracked. Noah. I smiled because my body knew how to do that before my heart could decide not to. Your tea was getting cold. Mr. Harris stood behind him with a leather folder pressed to his chest, suddenly fascinated by the floor. I stepped forward and placed the tray on the edge of Ethan's desk. The room smelled like cedar, paper, and the faint rain clinging to his coat. It was the smell I had trained myself to recognize as home. How embarrassing. How terribly human of me. Ethan reached out as if to stop me, but his hand paused in the air between us. He had always been careful not to touch me without a reason. Once, I thought that meant respect. Tonight, it felt like proof that even his kindness had boundaries I was never meant to cross. Noah, that is not what I meant. His voice was lower now. Not cold. Almost urgent. I looked at the neat stack of contracts on his desk, at my name printed beneath his in black ink, at the gold band on his finger that had never looked heavy to him. I am sorry, I said softly. I did not know I was part of a debt. His face changed then, not dramatically, not enough for anyone else to call it pain. But I saw it. I saw the way his jaw tightened, the way his breath caught before he forced it steady again. Ethan Caldwell, the alpha who could silence boardrooms with a glance, looked at me as if I had stepped back from a ledge he had not realized I was standing on. I bowed my head, because some habits were harder to break than hearts, and turned toward the hallway. Behind me, he said my name again. Just my name. No command. No explanation. No love. I kept walking past the dark dining room, past the table set for 2, past the cake waiting under glass like a foolish little dream. In the kitchen, I took off my apron, folded it neatly, and placed it beside the untouched plates. Then I looked at my wedding ring, bright under the warm stove light, and for the first time since the day Ethan put it on my finger, I wondered if it had ever meant the same thing to both of us. The first thing I did after realizing my marriage had been built on a promise to a dead woman was wash the dishes. It was absurd, but grief has strange manners. It does not always fall to the floor and scream. Sometimes it rolls up its sleeves, turns on the faucet, and scrubs buttercream from a cake knife while the house behind it stays painfully quiet. The water ran hot enough to redden my fingers. I kept my eyes on the sink, on the little bubbles clinging to the edge of the plates, on anything that was not the reflection of my own face in the dark kitchen window. I looked too calm there. Too practiced. Like an Omega who had spent a whole year learning how to be disappointed without making noise. The dining room behind me still glowed with the soft gold of the candles. One had burned lower than the other, wax gathering at its base like frozen tears. I had planned to blow them out when Ethan came home, maybe laugh and say dinner could be reheated. I had even imagined him noticing the cake. Not praising it, exactly. Ethan did not praise easily. But maybe he would look at it for a second longer than necessary and say, "You made this?" in that quiet voice of his. I had been willing to build an entire anniversary out of a single second of being seen. That was the embarrassing part. Not that he had forgotten. Not even that he had said the word debt. The embarrassing part was how little I had been asking for, and how much it still hurt not to receive it. I wrapped the chicken in foil, slid the carrots into a glass container, and labeled everything with blue tape because Ethan hated guessing what was in the fridge. My handwriting looked neat. Steady. A stranger might have seen those labels and thought I was fine. Rosemary chicken. Mashed potatoes. Vanilla cake. 1 year. I stopped with the marker uncapped in my hand. Then I peeled off the last piece of tape, threw it away, and put the cake in the back of the refrigerator where no one would notice it unless they were looking for something sweet. Ethan did not come into the kitchen right away. I heard Mr. Harris leave through the side entrance, heard the low murmur of Ethan dismissing him, heard the front hall settle back into silence. 10 minutes passed. Maybe 15. I was wiping down a counter that was already clean when his reflection appeared in the window behind mine. He had removed his suit jacket. His sleeves were rolled to his forearms, a rare crack in his perfect armor. "You should not be cleaning," he said. I looked down at the dish towel in my hand. "It is my kitchen too, is it not?" He went still. The question was gentle. That was the worst part. I had not meant it as a weapon, but it found something soft anyway. "Of course it is." I nodded as if that settled it. "Then I can clean it." He took one step closer, then stopped, like the invisible line between us had become something he could finally see. "Noah, I handled that conversation poorly." A laugh almost came out of me, small and ugly, but I swallowed it because I did not want to become someone who begged for tenderness in a room full of leftovers. "You handled it honestly." "No." His voice sharpened, not at me, but at himself. "I handled it incompletely." I folded the towel once. Then again. "That sounds like something a lawyer would say." His mouth parted slightly. For a strange second, I thought he might smile. He did not. Ethan Caldwell did not waste expressions. "Your mother asked me to protect you." There it was again. Protect. Such a clean word for such a lonely result. I looked toward the hallway, where the framed portraits of Caldwell men watched over the house with cold blue eyes and stiff collars. "And did protecting me require forgetting I was human?" His face changed so subtly that anyone else might have missed it. I did not. I had spent a year studying him the way some people studied weather, trying to predict storms from the smallest shift in air. Before he could answer, I untied my apron and placed it on the counter between us. "I am tired, Ethan." That was all. Not dramatic. Not brave. Just true. I walked past him, close enough to feel the warmth of his body and the restraint in the way he did not reach for me. At the stairs, I paused because I remembered something ridiculous. The tea. His tea was still sitting untouched on the desk, exactly 2 sugars for Mr. Harris, none for Ethan, steeped for 4 minutes because 3 made it too weak. I hated that I remembered. I hated that part of me still hoped he had noticed. Upstairs, I opened the door to the bedroom we shared in name only and began moving my clothes from the left side of the closet into the guest room across the hall. 1 sweater. 3 shirts. A pair of soft gray socks Ethan once bought after I got caught in the rain. I pressed them to my chest for 1 second, ashamed of how much that small kindness had meant. Then I folded them too. Downstairs, a floorboard creaked. Ethan had not followed me. But later, just before midnight, I found something outside the guest room door. A mug of fresh tea. Chamomile, honey, a thin slice of lemon. Not his drink. Mine. Beside it sat the blue tape I had thrown away, smooth flat, with the words I had written still visible. Vanilla cake. 1 year. By morning, the mug was cold, the tea untouched, and I hated myself a little for noticing that Ethan had remembered the lemon. It sat outside the guest room door like an apology too small to open, pale and quiet in the early light. I stepped over it carefully and went downstairs before the staff arrived, because the last thing I wanted was Mrs. Vale looking at me with that soft, knowing sadness housekeepers seem to inherit with age. The kitchen smelled faintly of vanilla and rosemary, last night's dinner packed neatly away in the refrigerator, as if grief could be stored in glass containers and reheated later. I made coffee out of habit. 1 black, no sugar. 1 with cream for myself. Then I stopped, staring at the 2 mugs side by side. His. Mine. A marriage in porcelain. I poured Ethan's down the sink. The sound was louder than it should have been. At 7:20, he entered in a charcoal suit, phone in one hand, cuff links unfinished at his wrists. To anyone else, he looked exactly the same. Cold. Expensive. Untouchable. But I saw the faint shadow under his eyes and the way his gaze went first to the counter, searching for the mug that was not there. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning." My voice came out calm. Too calm. He looked at the empty space beside my cup, then back at me. "I can make my own coffee." I know. That should have ended it. Instead, the silence stretched, filling the kitchen until the refrigerator hum sounded like thunder. Ethan moved toward the coffee machine, but his left cuff link slipped from his fingers and clicked beneath the island. We both bent at the same time. The space under the marble counter was narrow, too narrow for 2 people pretending they were not aware of each other. His shoulder brushed mine. Not even a real touch. Just wool against cotton. Still, every careful wall I had built overnight remembered being lonely. Ethan froze first. His hand hovered near the cuff link, inches from mine. "Sorry," he said, and the word was so soft I almost missed it. Not the polished apology of a man correcting a social mistake. A real one. I reached for the cuff link, but my sleeve caught on the cabinet handle. Before I could pull away, Ethan's hand came up, slow enough that I had time to move if I wanted to. He did not touch my skin. He only freed the fabric with 2 careful fingers, his face turned slightly away as if giving me privacy inside a moment too small to deserve it. "There," he said. I should have thanked him. Instead, I asked, "Is this how you protected me?" His eyes lifted to mine. In the cramped space beneath the counter, there was nowhere for either of us to become formal again. "By standing close enough to fix things I did not ask you to fix, but far enough away that you never had to feel responsible for what I felt?" The question landed between us with the cuff link, bright and silver and impossible to ignore. Ethan's expression did not harden. That almost made it worse. "I thought distance was safer." "For who?" He did not answer quickly. Outside, tires whispered over the wet driveway. Somewhere in the house, the heating system clicked on. His voice, when it came, was low. "At first, for you." I looked at him then, really looked. At the man who had signed papers to protect my inheritance, who had never raised his voice, never demanded affection, never crossed the line, and somehow still managed to leave me starving. In a room full of warmth. "And later?" His jaw tightened. "Later for me." It was the first selfish thing he had ever admitted to me. The first honest thing. I pulled my sleeve free completely and slid out from beneath the island, needing air, needing distance, needing not to care that his confession had reached for some foolish part of me. Ethan followed, but kept to the other side of the counter. The public version of him returned when his phone rang. His posture straightened. His voice turned smooth and cold as he answered a call from a board member, saying words like acquisition and liability with the same calm precision that made men twice his age obey him. I told myself not to watch. I watched anyway. Then his gaze shifted, catching on the thin red mark across my wrist where the cabinet handle had scraped me. His sentence stopped. Only for half a second, but I saw it. He opened the drawer beside him without looking, took out the small first aid kit Mrs. Vale kept there, and slid it across the counter toward me while continuing the call as if nothing had happened. Cold to the world. Careful with me only when no one was supposed to notice. I stared at the little white box. It should not have moved me. It did. And that was the problem. Because just as I touched it, his voice cut through the call, sharp enough to chill the room. Cancel my 10 o'clock meeting. My husband is not feeling well. My husband. The words should have felt like a claim. Instead, they sounded like something he had finally remembered how to say. For the rest of that morning, I tried very hard not to think about the words my husband had used like they were ordinary. My husband. 2 syllables said into a phone call, and somehow they followed me from the kitchen to the laundry room, from the laundry room to the back hallway, and finally into the glass house where I hid among basil, thyme, and the stubborn little lemon tree Ethan kept forgetting he owned. I told myself it did not matter. People said things for convenience all the time. Maybe he had only said it because board members understood marriage better than feelings. Maybe husband was easier than explaining why he had canceled a meeting for an omega with a scratched wrist and a wounded pride. Still, I replayed it while trimming dead leaves from the basil. Then I got annoyed at myself and trimmed too much. Perfect, I muttered, holding up the sad little stem. Now both of us are emotionally overpruned. Mrs. Vale found me there 20 minutes later, carrying a folded blanket and the expression of a woman who knew more than she planned to say. She was in her 60s, small, sharp-eyed, and somehow able to make silence feel like a lecture. Mr. Caldwell asked me to bring this. I looked at the blanket. Soft gray wool. The one from Ethan's private sitting room. I am not cold. That is what I told him. She draped it over the bench anyway. He said you would say that. I almost smiled, which felt like a betrayal of my own sadness. Did he also predict I would find that annoying? No, but I believe he hoped you would. That did it. A small laugh escaped before I could stop it, thin but real. Mrs. Vale's face softened, and for a moment the glass house did not feel like a museum of plants trying to survive winter. Then she glanced toward the door and lowered her voice. Mrs. Whitaker called the main line. My hand stilled. Aunt Marlene. My mother's older sister, the woman who had hugged me at the funeral with one hand and asked about estate documents with the other. What did she want? To visit. The blanket suddenly looked less funny. When? Before Mrs. Vale could answer, the front door bell chimed through the house, elegant and terrible. I closed my eyes. Of course. In families like mine, concern never waited for permission. Aunt Marlene arrived wearing a camel coat, pearl earrings, and a perfume so sweet it made the air feel sticky. With her came my cousin Peter, smiling the way people smile when they are already judging the furniture. They found me in the front parlor because I had not moved quickly enough to escape. Noah, sweetheart, Aunt Marlene said, taking both my hands and squeezing them just a little too hard. Her eyes flicked to my ring, then to the staircase, then to the empty space beside me. Are you alone again? The word again slid under my skin. Ethan is working. Of course he is. Peter wandered toward the fireplace, studying a Caldwell family portrait like he expected it to apologize. Men like that do not marry for companionship. I kept my voice gentle. You do not know him. Aunt Marlene gave me a sad little smile that made me feel 12 years old. We know enough. Your mother would have hated seeing you disappear into this house. That hurt because part of me feared it was true. The room blurred at the edges, not with tears, exactly, but with the strain of holding myself together politely. My mother trusted Ethan. Your mother was dying, Peter said, too quickly, too carelessly. People make sentimental mistakes when they are dying. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. I did not turn around, but I knew Ethan had entered before anyone spoke. The air changed around him, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet pressure of a door closing against a storm. Mr. Whitaker, Ethan said, his voice smooth enough to be dangerous in the most civilized way. You are standing in my home, speaking about a woman who showed more grace on her worst day than you have shown in your entire visit. Peter's smile vanished. Aunt Marlene straightened. Ethan, we are only concerned for Noah. Then speak to him with respect. He crossed the room, not to stand in front of me, not to make a display, but to stand beside me. Close enough that I could feel his presence. Far enough that I still had room to breathe. Noah is not a misplaced heirloom you came to retrieve. My throat tightened. I hated how badly I needed those words. I hated that he said them perfectly. Aunt Marlene's face cooled. And what is he to you, exactly? There it was. The question I was too afraid to ask and too tired to avoid. Ethan looked at me first. Not at them. At me. His eyes held something uncertain, something almost exposed. Then he said quietly, "Someone I failed by treating protection like love." No one moved. Even Peter had the sense to be silent. My pulse beat once, hard and confused. It was not an apology performed for relatives. It was too plain for that. Too costly. Aunt Marlene left soon after, offended in the elegant way rich people manage when they lose control of a room. Peter followed, muttering something about legal review that Ethan ignored completely. When the door closed, the house exhaled. I should have thanked him. Instead, I stared at the floor and whispered, "Do you believe that?" Ethan did not pretend to misunderstand. Yes. I looked up. Then why did I have to hear it with them in the room? The question struck harder than I meant it to. His face went still. Before he could answer, Mrs. Vale appeared at the parlor entrance, holding a small cream envelope. "This was left with the mail, sir." Ethan took it, glanced at the handwriting, and every bit of color drained from his face. For the first time since I had known him, he looked afraid. On the front, in my mother's handwriting, was my name. The envelope looked too fragile to carry the weight it suddenly had. Cream paper, softened at the corners, my name written in my mother's careful hand. Noah. Just 5 letters, but they made the room tilt in a way no argument ever could. I reached for it, then stopped, because Ethan was still holding it like a man afraid paper could burn. "Where did this come from?" I asked. Mrs. Vale answered gently from the doorway. "It was inside a sealed box from the Whitaker storage unit. Your aunt's attorney released several items this morning." Aunt Marlene. Of course. Even gone from the room, she had found a way to reach back in and touch something tender. Ethan handed me the envelope without a word. His fingers brushed the edge of mine for half a second, careful and cold with restraint. I sat on the sofa because my knees did not feel reliable, then opened it with the same caution I used as a child when unwrapping Christmas ornaments from tissue paper. My mother's handwriting filled 1 page. No legal language. No instructions. Just her voice, somehow alive in blue ink. "My darling Noah, if you are reading this, it means I trusted the right person and still left you with questions." I covered my mouth. Ethan turned toward the window, giving me privacy, but his shoulders were too still. He had read this before. Maybe not this exact letter, but something like it. Something that had tied him to me long before I understood the knot. I kept reading. "Ethan Caldwell is not an easy boy." She had written boy, not man, and despite everything, a small broken laugh slipped out of me. "He has spent too many years being praised for being useful and not enough being held when he was afraid. Do not mistake his silence for emptiness. But do not let his silence become your home." That sentence settled into the room like a third person. I heard Ethan breathe in, slow and uneven. My mother had known. Somehow, from a hospital bed, with her hands thin as paper and her favorite yellow cardigan folded at her feet, she had seen both of us more clearly than we had seen ourselves. The letter continued, and her words brought back a memory so sharp I could smell disinfectant and vending machine coffee. I was 17, sitting beside her bed in a plastic chair that squeaked every time I moved. Ethan had been 24 then, already wearing suits that made nurses whisper, already carrying the kind of loneliness money could not soften. He came every Thursday at 6, never late, always with grocery store daisies because my mother once said expensive flowers looked embarrassed in hospitals. He would stand awkwardly near the door until she patted the chair and told him to stop pretending he was furniture. Sometimes she made him eat half her pudding cup. He always claimed he did not like pudding. He always finished it. I had thought he was visiting out of politeness. I had not known my mother was quietly teaching a frozen person how to sit in a warm room. My eyes blurred over the last paragraph. If Ethan offers you safety, accept it if you need it. But my sweet boy, safety is only the floor of a house. Love must be the light. Promise me you will not spend your life grateful for a roof if your heart is still standing outside in the rain. I folded the letter once, then pressed it against my chest. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Outside, a delivery truck rolled past the gates, ordinary and bright blue, painfully normal. Somewhere down the hall, the dryer chimed its cheerful little song, announcing that towels were done while my life quietly changed shape. I almost laughed again. Americans could build machines that sang about laundry, but not one that told you what to do when your dead mother understood your marriage better than you did. Ethan finally spoke. She gave me a letter too. I looked up. When? The week before she passed. His voice was controlled, but barely. She asked me to make sure you had choices. Money. Protection. A place no one could take from you. And you heard marriage. His eyes closed for a second. I heard responsibility. Because responsibility does not leave. The question came out softer than anger. That made it more dangerous. Ethan looked at me then, and the answer was written all over his face before he said it. Yes. There he was. Not the untouchable alpha on magazine covers. Not the man who could cancel meetings with one sentence. Just someone who had been left young enough to believe love was unreliable, but duty could be locked in a safe. My chest hurt with the unfairness of it. For him. For me. For my mother, who had tried to leave behind light and accidentally handed us a match neither of us knew how to use. Ethan, I said, holding the letter tighter. I cannot be another promise you keep because you are afraid to want me. His jaw trembled once. So small. So human. I know. I stood, and this time when I walked past him, he did not ask me to stay. At the staircase, I paused and looked back. He was still by the window, one hand braced against the frame, staring out at the gray morning like it had finally asked something from him he could not buy, fix, or control. On the coffee table, my mother's letter lay open again, the last line visible from where I stood. Choose warmth, even if it takes courage. And for the first time, I wondered which one of us she had really been warning. For 3 days after my mother's letter, Ethan became colder in the way people become quiet when they are trying not to break something. He did not avoid me completely. That would have been easier to hate. Instead, he became precise. Careful. He left for the office before breakfast and came home after dinner, but every morning there was a mug of chamomile outside the guest room door, fresh enough to steam. Every night the hall light stayed on, even though the Caldwell house had always preferred shadows. He was learning my fears like a language he was too late to speak, and I was too tired to translate. On the 4th morning, I found a small white card beside the tea. Not a note. An appointment reminder. Whitaker Estate Review, 10:30 in the morning, Caldwell Legal Offices. My stomach tightened. I read it twice, then a third time, hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something less humiliating. Ethan had scheduled a meeting about my mother's estate without asking me. Again. Protection dressed as control. Responsibility wearing a suit. I almost went to his study, almost knocked, almost asked why he could defend me in front of my aunt but still make decisions around me like I was a child standing in the rain. Instead, I folded the card in half, placed it in the trash, and packed a small overnight bag. It was not dramatic. 2 sweaters, jeans, socks, my toothbrush, my mother's letter tucked inside the front pocket. I left the wedding ring on because taking it off felt too much like begging him to notice. Mrs. Vale found me near the back door with my coat over one arm. Her eyes dropped to the bag, then returned to my face. She did not ask if I was leaving. She only said, "It is supposed to rain tonight." I smiled a little. "Then I will buy an umbrella." Her mouth tightened, but she nodded. "There is a studio apartment above the old florist on Maple. The owner is my cousin. It is small, but the heat works." That was how I knew she had been waiting for me to choose myself. Not pushing. Not pitying. Just keeping a door unlocked somewhere else in the world. The apartment was 800 square feet if you counted generously, and included the slanted corner where the ceiling dipped low enough that I bumped my head twice in one afternoon. The radiator hissed like an angry cat. The kitchen faucet squeaked. The bedroom window overlooked a parking lot and a bakery with a crooked blue awning. It was not beautiful. But the first night I slept there, no portraits watched me from the walls. No marble hallway swallowed my footsteps. No one thanked me like staff for making a house livable. I woke at 6 to the smell of coffee drifting up from downstairs and cried for 3 quiet minutes because it felt like grief and freedom had decided to share the same chair. By noon, my phone had 17 missed calls. None from Ethan. Somehow, that hurt more, because I could almost imagine him standing somewhere with my number open, choosing not to press call because he finally understood that chasing me was not the same as respecting me. That should have relieved me. It did not. Then the article appeared. Peter sent it, because cruelty often arrives pretending to be concerned. The Caldwell name had always been the kind of name local blogs watched like weather. Local Omega husband seen leaving Caldwell estate amid family dispute. Beneath the headline was a blurred photo of me outside the back gate, my overnight bag in hand, my face turned down against the wind. The comments were worse than the article. Gold digger. Runaway spouse. Probably found someone warmer. One person wrote, "Must be hard living in a mansion for free." I stared at that line for a long time. Then I laughed once, because if they had seen me eating cereal from a coffee mug in a borrowed apartment with no shower curtain, they might have been disappointed by how unglamorous heartbreak looked. At 2 in the afternoon, I started my first shift at the flower shop downstairs. The owner, Mrs. Vale's cousin, was a round-faced woman named Diane who wore purple glasses and called everyone honey with equal aggression. Her part-time assistant, Caleb Monroe, was a tall, easy-smiling beta with rolled sleeves and a talent for making terrible coffee. "You are Noah, right?" he asked, handing me a pair of pruning shears. "Diane said you have gentle hands." I looked at the shears. "That sounds like a dangerous thing to say while giving someone blades." Caleb grinned. "Fair. Let us call them emotionally responsible hands." It was such a normal joke that I almost did not know what to do with it. So I smiled. A real one. Small, but mine. That evening, while I was arranging white tulips near the front window, a black Caldwell town car stopped across the street. My hands went still. Ethan stepped out into the rain. Without an umbrella, his dark coat catching silver drops under the streetlight. He saw me through the glass. I saw him see Caleb lean over my shoulder to adjust a crooked stem, harmless and kind and close. Ethan's face did not change. That was the worst part. The mask returned so completely it felt like a door closing. He did not come inside. He only looked at me for one long moment, then turned back to the car. 10 minutes later, Diane's phone rang. She answered, listened, and slowly looked at me. "Honey," she said, covering the receiver. "A Mr. Caldwell just bought every arrangement in the shop. He says to send them to the children's hospital. All except the white tulips in the window." I looked down at the flowers in my hands. "What about those?" Diane's expression softened in a way that made my chest ache. "He said those should stay where they are, because you were still working on them." The next morning, the white tulips were still in the window, untouched except for one stem I had cut too short. It leaned slightly away from the others, awkward and stubborn, and for some reason I understood it better than I understood myself. Diane told me to leave it. "Perfect flowers make people nervous," she said, sliding me a paper cup of coffee that tasted like warm regret. Caleb laughed from behind the counter and said, "That is Diane language for she forgot to order more." I smiled because it was easy there. Not happy exactly. Easy. No one watched my hands for tremors. No one turned my silence into a legal problem. I spent the morning wrapping bouquets in brown paper and tying twine into crooked bows. Around noon, an elderly man came in for daisies because his wife liked flowers that did not act expensive. I almost cried while ringing him up, which was embarrassing, so I blamed the pollen. By 3, the rain had turned to a gray mist, and I was carrying a bucket of fresh water to the window when the bell above the door rang. I knew it was Ethan before I looked up. The air changed, the way it always did around him, becoming quieter without becoming softer. He stood just inside the doorway in a black overcoat, his hair damp from the weather, one hand holding a plain white envelope. Not flowers. Not a gift. A document. My chest tightened before he spoke. Noah. Diane suddenly found a reason to take Caleb into the back room, though Caleb looked like he would rather stand there holding a fern as emotional support. Ethan's eyes moved over my apron, the rolled sleeves, the little green smear on my wrist from trimming stems. He looked at me the way a man looks at a room he once owned and is only now realizing was never furniture. You did not come to the estate review, he said. I set the bucket down carefully. I know. I should have asked. There was no defense in his voice. No boardroom coldness. Just the fact, laid between us like something breakable. Yes, I said. You should have. He nodded once, accepting the hit without flinching. That almost made me angrier. I wanted him to argue, maybe because anger would have been easier than this quiet version of him, the one who looked like he had not slept and still remembered to stand far enough away from me. He placed the envelope on the counter. These are not estate papers. I did not touch it. Then what are they? His hand lowered to his side. A separation agreement. The shop seemed to shrink around those words. Outside, a bus hissed at the curb. Somewhere in the back room, Caleb dropped something metal and whispered a very guilty sorry. Ethan did not look away from me. It gives you the apartment for as long as you want it, independent access to your inheritance, and a monthly account that does not require my approval. The house remains open to you, but I will not ask you to return. My throat felt too small. You had papers made. Yes. You really are good at turning feelings into paperwork. Pain crossed his face. Fast. Controlled. I know. I picked up the envelope then, because my hands needed something to do besides shake. It was heavier than it looked. Is this what you want? Ethan's jaw tightened. For a moment, the old him almost appeared, the man who could hide inside perfect posture. But then he let the mask fail. No. One word. Bare. Useless. Devastating. I looked down at the envelope. Then why bring it? His voice lowered. Because wanting you and deserving to keep you are not the same thing. The sentence moved through me slowly, finding every place I had tried to harden. I hated him for learning that now. I hated that it mattered. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small wrapped in a folded handkerchief. He placed it beside the envelope. My gray socks. The soft ones he had bought after I got caught in the rain, the ones I had accidentally left behind in the guest room. They had been washed and folded into a neat little pair. Such a ridiculous thing to break over. Not the agreement. Not the money. The socks. I stared at them until the tulips blurred in the window. You came all the way here to give me laundry? I whispered. A faint, broken breath left him. Almost a laugh. Almost grief. You hate cold feet. There it was. The tenderness he had always hidden inside practical things. Too late, maybe. Too careful, maybe. But real enough to hurt. I pressed the envelope against my chest and forced myself to meet his eyes. I do not know how to come back to a house where I felt invisible. Ethan nodded, and I saw the cost of him not begging. Then do not come back for the house. His voice shook just once. Come back only if one day I become someone you can see without hurting. He turned after that. No dramatic goodbye. No hand reaching for mine. Just Ethan Caldwell walking out into the mist with his empty hands at his sides, leaving my freedom on the counter and my warm socks beside it. I stood there long after the bell stopped ringing, staring at the window where the crooked tulip had finally bent low enough to touch the glass. After Ethan left the flower shop, I did not open the envelope for 2 hours. I carried it upstairs to the apartment, placed it on the tiny kitchen table, then moved it to the counter, then moved it back again like changing its location might change what it meant. Diane sent up a bowl of chicken noodle soup with a note that said, "Eat before making life decisions," which was the most Midwestern wisdom I had ever received from a woman born in New Jersey. I ate 3 spoonfuls, tasted nothing, and finally opened the papers while rain tapped against the window. Everything was exactly as Ethan said. No traps. No fine print shaped like a cage. My name, my access, my choice. He had signed every page already. At the bottom of the last sheet, under his controlled signature, he had written one sentence by hand. You were never my debt. You were my lesson. I read it once. Then again. Then I folded the page too carefully and put it beneath my mother's letter, because I did not know what else to do with a truth that arrived after it had already hurt me. Across town, the Caldwell house became famous again for all the wrong reasons. The article about me leaving should have lasted 1 day, maybe 2, but Peter fed it like a stray cat. He wanted to become a monster. By Friday, people were calling me ungrateful online, calling Ethan cold, calling our marriage a transaction as if they had discovered something we had not been bleeding over in private. Ethan said nothing publicly at first. That was what people expected from him. The untouchable alpha. The elegant wall in a tailored suit. But Mrs. Vale called me that evening, not to gossip, she insisted, though her voice carried the exact shape of gossip wearing church clothes. He came home early, she said. I sat on the edge of my bed, the gray socks folded beside me. Is he all right? No. The answer was so plain that I had no defense against it. He went to the kitchen and opened every container in the refrigerator. My throat tightened. Why? I believe he was looking for the anniversary dinner. I closed my eyes. The rosemary chicken. The carrots. The cake hidden in the back. It is probably spoiled by now. It was. Mrs. Vale paused. Not at first. He stood there for nearly 10 minutes before he let me throw it away. That image stayed with me longer than it should have. Ethan, standing in his expensive kitchen, surrounded by food I had cooked with hope before it curdled into shame. Ethan, finally seeing what love looked like after it had gone cold. Later that night, a video appeared from the Caldwell Foundation Gala. I did not plan to watch it. Caleb showed me by accident during inventory, then looked so horrified by my face that he offered to delete the entire internet. In the clip, Ethan stood at a podium beneath bright chandeliers, expression calm, posture perfect, every inch the man the public understood. A reporter asked whether his husband had left because the marriage had only been a family arrangement. The room went quiet. Ethan looked directly into the cameras, and for a moment I saw the version of him everyone else saw. Controlled. Distant. Untouchable. Then he said, My husband left because I made a home safe enough to live in, but not warm enough to stay in. No one spoke. Not even the reporters. Ethan continued, voice steady but stripped of its usual armor. Noah Whitaker owes me nothing. Not gratitude, not silence, not forgiveness. If you want a story, write that I failed a gentle person by assuming protection was the same as love. Caleb lowered the phone slowly. Diane, who had absolutely been pretending not to watch from behind a bucket of roses, whispered, Well, damn. I laughed once, and then I cried so suddenly that Caleb handed me a roll of floral ribbon instead of tissues. It was ridiculous. It was blue satin. I used it anyway. That night, I almost texted Ethan. I typed 3 words. I saw it. Then I deleted them. Then I typed thank you. Deleted that too. At midnight, my phone lit up with a message from him. No pressure to answer. Mrs. Vale said you forget to eat when upset. Please eat something with protein. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. It was not romantic. It was not dramatic. It was exactly Ethan, trying to love through the only door he knew was still unlocked. Downstairs in the shop window, the crooked white tulip had finally been replaced, but Diane had saved it in a small glass jar by the register. Its stem was bent. Its petals were tired. Still, somehow, it had opened. Spring came slowly, the way forgiveness does. It did not arrive all at once with sunlight and music. It came in small, uneven pieces. A warmer morning. A longer breath. A day when I could pass the Caldwell town car outside a downtown office and not feel my chest fold in on itself. I stayed above the flowers shop through February, then March, learning the shape of my own life when no one else's needs filled the rooms first. I learned that I liked diner pancakes at 7 in the morning, especially when the butter came in those tiny foil squares. I learned that I killed succulents but could keep tulips alive. I learned that Caleb sang badly to the radio when he thought no one was listening, and that Diane believed every emotional crisis could be improved by soup, taxes, or a haircut. Some nights, I missed Ethan so sharply it felt like reaching for a railing that was not there. Other nights, I slept deeply, diagonally across the bed, and woke up without apologizing to the empty room. Ethan did not ask me to come home. That mattered. He sent practical messages once in a while, always careful, always giving me space. Your insurance card was updated. Mrs. Vale found your sketchbook. The lemon tree has fruit, though I suspect it is doing so out of spite. That one made me laugh for almost a full minute. Then, on the first Sunday in April, I went to visit my mother. The cemetery sat on a hill outside the city, where the wind smelled like wet grass and distant traffic. I brought white tulips, not perfect ones. The slightly crooked kind. I was halfway up the path when I saw Ethan standing by her grave. He wore no overcoat despite the chill, just a dark sweater and slacks, his hair moving in the wind. In one hand, he held grocery store daisies. Not elegant. Not expensive. Exactly right. I stopped behind an oak tree before he could see me. I did not mean to listen. Then he spoke, and my feet stayed where they were. Clara, he said quietly, and the sound of my mother's name in his voice nearly broke me. I kept the roof over him. I kept the accounts clean. I kept the relatives away. A pause. The wind moved through the branches. But I did not keep him loved. He looked down at the flowers in his hand like they had given him no instructions. I thought love was the dangerous part. I thought if I stayed useful, I could not fail him the way people failed me. But usefulness is not warmth. I know that now. His voice thinned, not enough to shatter, but enough to show the crack. I am not asking you to help me get him back. I do not think that is fair. I just wanted you to know he chose himself. You would be proud of him. I pressed my hand over my mouth. Not because he had said the perfect thing, but because he had not said it for me. He had not known I was there. When he finally turned and saw me, all the color left his face. For a moment, we were both just standing in the spring wind, two people who had hurt each other by not understanding what love needed to survive. Noah, he said, I can leave. No. My voice was rougher than I expected. Stay. We stood side by side at my mother's grave, not touching. I placed my tulips beside his daisies. Crooked white and simple yellow. Somehow, they looked like they belonged together. I signed the separation papers. I said. Ethan closed his eyes for 1 second, then nodded. I understand. I also leased the apartment for another 6 months. Good. He swallowed. You should have somewhere that is yours. That answer hurt and healed at the same time. I looked at him then, really looked. He seemed thinner, tired around the eyes, still beautiful in that distant Caldwell way, but less untouchable. More human. I am not ready to come home. I said. I know. And I am not ready to pretend what happened was only a misunderstanding. It was not. His answer came immediately. It was harm. Even if I did not mean it that way. The old Ethan would have polished that sentence until it had no blood in it. This Ethan let it stand rough and true. I breathed in, and for once, the air did not feel borrowed. But I would like to have coffee with you sometime. His eyes lifted to mine. Hope crossed his face so carefully it almost asked permission. Coffee, he repeated. Just coffee. I can do just coffee. A small smile touched my mouth. Can you? He looked toward the grave, then back at me. I am learning moderation. It was such an Ethan thing to say that I laughed, and the sound surprised both of us. Months later, people would ask if that was the day I forgave him. It was not. Forgiveness was not a gate I walked through. It was a road, and some days I still turn back. But that was the day I believed he understood the difference between keeping someone and loving them. We did have coffee. Then another. Eventually dinner. Much later, I visited the Caldwell house again and found the hall lights warm, the portraits moved, and the kitchen full of smoke because Ethan had tried to bake lemon bread without reading the whole recipe. I laughed until I cried. He stood there with flour on his sleeve, holding a ruined loaf like evidence of personal growth. It said zest, he said helplessly. I assumed more was better. I took the pan from him and set it in the sink. That is very on brand for you. He smiled then. Not perfectly. Not like a man who had won me back. Like a man grateful to be standing in the same room, being teased by someone he loved. I did not move back that night. Or the next week. When I finally did, it was not because I owed my mother, or because Ethan needed saving, or because a house with marble floors had learned to mimic warmth. I came back because the door was open, the choice was mine, and the man waiting inside no longer treated love like a debt to repay. He treated it like a light to keep on.